Imagine waking up one morning, grabbing your coffee and scrolling through the latest news. And there it is. Trump's approval rating sinks to just 41%. Not just any 41%. This is the lowest approval rating for any president at the 100-day mark of a term in modern American history. Lower than Biden, lower than Obama, even lower than Bush. Now, whether you supported him once or never did, you have to pause for a second. Because numbers like that, they don't just happen. They mean something. They tell a story about promises made and promises broken, about hopes raised and then dashed, about a country asking itself tough questions. And tonight, that's exactly what we're diving into. What does a 41% approval rating really mean for America's future? Is it just a passing number, or is it the start of something much bigger? Because if history teaches us anything, it's that approval ratings are not just about one man. They're about the direction a nation is headed, about the trust between leaders and the people they serve. So sit back, get comfortable. We're about to unpack the story behind the numbers and what they might be trying to tell us before it's too late. Have you ever wondered how much a few percentage points really matter? Because when we start looking back at history, we realize they matter a lot. Right now, Donald Trump's approval rating sits at just 41% after 100 days into his second term. That's not just a number, it's a flashing warning sign, and one that's even more urgent when you compare it to past presidents at the same point in time. When Barack Obama hit his first 100 days, he enjoyed a strong 63% approval. George W. Bush, he stood at 62%. Joe Biden, even with all the turbulence he faced early on, was at 53%. And Trump? Well, during his first term's 100-day mark, he managed 44%. Not great, but still a few points higher than where he is now. That decline, even just a few points, is not random. It reflects something deeper: erosion of trust, disappointment, and perhaps exhaustion. In a political climate like America's, small numbers can create big waves. We've seen it before. Let's take a quick trip back to 1978. President Jimmy Carter's approval rating had plummeted by the second year of his presidency. People were frustrated about inflation, energy shortages, and what they saw as ineffective leadership. And when midterms came around, Carter's Democratic Party took a beating in Congress. Not long after, Ronald Reagan swept into office on a promise of bold change. When trust starts to crack, it doesn't always shatter immediately. Sometimes it crumbles slowly until one day the whole structure gives way. Personally, looking at these numbers, I feel like America isn't just judging Trump's policies anymore. They're judging the bigger picture, his leadership style, the turbulence he often invites, the fatigue many feel after years of conflict-driven politics. And honestly, that fatigue is real. You can sense it when you talk to friends, neighbors, even strangers at a local diner. There's this undercurrent of, we're tired. Tired of the drama, tired of the promises that never seem to materialize. It's no longer just about Democrats versus Republicans. It's about whether the public believes that real solutions are still possible under Trump's leadership. And when the numbers show a 41% approval, lower than any president in modern history at this point, it's hard to argue that the American people aren't sending a loud and clear message. So where does that leave Trump now? And more importantly, how will his broken promises on the economy and immigration come back to haunt him? Let's dig deeper. Have you ever believed in a promise only to watch it slowly fall apart? That's exactly the feeling many Americans are wrestling with right now. Back in 2016 and again in 2024, Trump made bold promises. He vowed to fix the economy, to bring back jobs, to win trade wars that would somehow make America stronger. On immigration, he promised swift action, a safer border, fewer illegal crossings, and a system that finally worked. For a lot of folks, those promises sparked hope. Hope that maybe this time someone would finally deliver. But fast forward to today, and the numbers tell a very different story. Trump's approval rating on the economy down to just 39%. That's a full 10 points lower than where he stood in his first term. On immigration, a dismal 45%, a sharp drop for a president who made immigration one of his signature issues. And here's where it gets personal. I grew up in a small town where manufacturing jobs were everything. I still remember neighbors talking about how Trump's tariffs would bring back factories and make our town thrive again. Instead, we saw more layoffs. Family farms went bankrupt because of retaliatory tariffs from China. Small businesses struggled with rising costs. It's painful when reality doesn't match the hope you once clung to. Immigration, too, hasn't played out the way many expected. The promised wall became more symbolic than real. Crackdowns disrupted families and communities, but the larger system? Still broken. Cities are still overwhelmed. The promises of swift reform have largely turned into endless legal battles and policy confusion. And here's the hard truth. When leaders overpromise and underdeliver, it doesn't just create political problems. It breeds cynicism. It erodes faith, not just in one person, but in the very idea that change is even possible. That's why Trump's sinking approval isn't just about policies failing. It's about trust and how hard it is to rebuild once it's been broken. And yet, even as his numbers fall, Trump seems unwilling to truly pivot, to acknowledge the gap between his promises and what's actually happened. Which leaves us with a crucial question. If Americans feel this betrayed economically and socially, how will that shape their votes, especially among independents? Coming up next, let's dive into the shifting tide of independent voters and why their changing loyalty could be the real game changer in the next election. Have you ever noticed how it's not the loudest voices that change elections, but the quiet ones in the middle? Those who aren't locked into one party or the other, but who listen, think, and decide based on what they feel is best for the country. Those are the independents, and right now, they're quietly walking away from Donald Trump. According to the latest data, only 31% of independent voters approve of the job Trump is doing. That's a staggering drop, and if you know anything about American politics, you know this. No president wins without convincing independents to come along for the ride. They are the tiebreakers, the bridge builders, the ones who tip the balance when the nation feels divided. And independents, by their nature, don't pledge loyalty lightly. They're not swayed by party loyalty. They're swayed by performance, by leadership, by results. So why are so many turning away now? From what I've seen, and from many conversations I've had with friends and neighbors, it's a mix of disillusionment and exhaustion. They wanted economic stability. Instead, they see rising costs, chaotic trade policies, and a sense that America's global leadership is slipping. They hope for strong but thoughtful immigration reform. Instead, they see disruption without real solutions. More importantly, many independents are driven by a deep desire for calm, steady leadership. Not endless drama, not leaders who seem to thrive on conflict and outrage. And here's where it gets personal for me. Some of the most thoughtful, caring people I know are independents. People who believe deeply in this country, but who are tired of feeling like they have to choose between two extremes. They want a leader who unites, not divides. When Trump's approval among independents drops this low, it doesn't just hurt his numbers, it signals a deeper shift. A shift in trust. A shift in who Americans believe deserves the responsibility of leading us forward. And if history is any guide, losing the independents often signals the beginning of the end for any political movement. But Trump's troubles don't end there, because cracks are beginning to show within his own party too. And that might be even more dangerous than losing independents. Let's take a closer look at what's happening behind closed doors in the Republican Party and why some of Trump's strongest allies are starting to sound the alarm. Sometimes the loudest warnings aren't the ones shouted in public. They're the ones whispered behind closed doors. And right now, behind the polished speeches and smiling photo ops, there's a quiet unease growing inside the Republican Party. The red wall that once seemed so solid, it's starting to crack. It's not just the usual critics anymore. We're seeing major Republican voices, people like Ken Griffin, one of the party's biggest donors, openly express concern that Trump is damaging not just the GOP, but the very brand of America itself. Think about that for a second. This isn't a liberal talking point. This is coming from inside the House. And it's not hard to understand why. Republican strategists, members of Congress, and even longtime supporters are looking at the 41% approval rating. They're seeing the growing disapproval among independents. They're seeing the chaos that follows Trump, whether it's policy reversals, infighting, or endless controversies. And they're asking themselves a very real, very uncomfortable question. Is sticking with Trump worth losing the House, losing the Senate, losing the White House again? From private donor meetings to quiet backroom conversations on Capitol Hill, there's a growing sense of dread. They remember 2018 when the GOP lost the House. They remember 2020 when the Senate flipped. They remember how badly things can spiral when voters, especially suburban voters and independents, decide they've had enough. Personally, I think the most telling sign isn't in the polls. It's in the hesitation. The slight pauses you hear when Republican leaders are asked about Trump's future. The way they carefully hedge their words now instead of offering full-throated endorsements like they used to. That hesitation speaks volumes, because deep down they know a divided party can't win. A party that alienates the middle can't survive a national election. And when the very people who once fueled your rise begin questioning your leadership, that's not just a political problem. That's a survival problem. But Trump's challenges aren't just domestic. America's reputation around the world has also taken serious hits under his leadership. And that's something we can't afford to ignore. Coming up, let's explore how Trump's international standing has changed and why the world's view of America matters more than ever. It's easy to think that what happens here in America stays here. But the truth is, the world is always watching. And under Donald Trump's leadership, America's image abroad has changed, and not for the better. During Trump's first term, we saw allies questioning America's commitments. Long-standing partnerships like NATO were shaken. Friendly nations, once confident in America's word, began to hedge their bets. Remember when Germany's Chancellor Angela Merkel said Europe must take its fate into its own hands? That wasn't just rhetoric. That was the sound of an old ally realizing that maybe, just maybe, America was no longer the steady hand it used to be. Under Trump, trade wars flared not just with China, but with our friends, Canada, the European Union, Japan. Tariffs, threats, and unpredictable policies made our partners rethink decades of cooperation. And it didn't stop there. On the global stage, whether it was pulling out of the Paris Climate Agreement or abandoning leadership roles at the United Nations, America's influence began to shrink. Where once we led, others, China, Russia, even smaller nations, began stepping into the void. Now some might say, good, America first. And I understand that sentiment, but isolation comes at a cost. When America steps back, the world doesn't just freeze and wait, it moves on. Often in ways that don't favor our values, our economy, or our national security. Personally, as someone who grew up believing in America's unique role as a global leader, it's painful to see that trust erode, because it's not just about diplomacy or treaties. It's about the image of America as a beacon, a place of reliability, fairness, and yes, strength. When that image cracks, it doesn't just affect politicians. It affects our businesses trying to compete overseas. It affects our soldiers standing with allies. It affects the next generation growing up in a world that may no longer see America as the trusted cornerstone it once was. And here's the thing, a shrinking reputation abroad often mirrors deeper struggles at home. When a nation is divided, when its leader's approval is sinking, the world takes notice, and it moves accordingly. But Trump's approval woes and America's fading image aren't just problems for the history books. They're already shaping the future, especially as we look ahead to the critical midterm elections of 2026. Next, let's explore how Trump's approval rating could spell disaster for Republicans in the coming midterms, and why history tells us the signs are already flashing red. You know, history has this funny way of whispering warnings, if we're willing to listen. And if we look closely right now, it's not just a whisper. It's a full-blown alarm. Trump's approval rating sitting at 41% isn't just a personal problem for him. It's a massive red flag for the entire Republican Party, especially with the 2026 midterms looming on the horizon. In American politics, midterm elections have always been tough on the party holding the White House. But when the president's approval rating sinks below 45%, it usually spells disaster. Take 2010, for example. Barack Obama's approval rating dipped into the low 40s, and Democrats lost a crushing 63 seats in the House. Or go back to '94 when Bill Clinton struggled early in his first term. A Republican surged and took control of Congress for the first time in 40 years. History doesn't just rhyme, sometimes it sings in perfect tune. And if Trump's numbers stay this low, Republicans aren't just at risk of losing a few seats. They're staring down the real possibility of losing their House majority, maybe even their grip on the Senate, and with it, their ability to control the national agenda. Now, some within the party are still hoping things will turn around. They believe the economy might improve, or that political fatigue will eventually hurt Democrats more than Republicans. But from where I stand, and from everything we have seen in past elections, hope isn't a strategy. Voters are paying attention now. Independents are drifting away. Even some Republican donors are quietly pulling their support, or at least hedging their bets. And honestly, I get it. Because midterms aren't just a test of policy. They're a test of energy, of enthusiasm, of trust. And right now, the Republican Party, under Trump's shadow, is struggling to inspire the kind of hope, unity, and fresh energy that midterm victories demand. If anything, the infighting, the broken promises, and the sinking approval numbers are painting a very clear picture. The risk isn't just losing a few seats, it's losing the broader coalition that once made them a powerful force in American politics. And here's the toughest part. While individual candidates will scramble to save their own seats, the weight of Trump's unpopularity could drag many of them down, no matter how strong they are locally. As the saying goes, a rising tide lifts all boats. But when the tide goes out, you quickly see who's been left vulnerable. Coming up next, let's tie it all together. From Trump's broken promises to lost trust to America's standing in the world. And ask, what does all of this mean for you and for the future of the country we love? When we step back and look at the big picture, the story becomes clear. We've seen a former president struggling with the lowest approval rating at this point in any modern presidency. We've seen cracks forming within his own party, doubts growing louder, alliances growing weaker. We've seen independent voters, once a vital bridge to victory, slowly and quietly walking away. And beyond our borders, we've seen America's influence shrink as uncertainty and unpredictability replace trust in leadership. These aren't just isolated facts. They are signs that something fundamental is shifting in American politics and in America itself. The real question isn't just about Donald Trump. It's about us. It's about whether we, as citizens, are paying attention, whether we are willing to demand more from our leaders, honesty, responsibility, vision. Because at the end of the day, democracy doesn't thrive when we tune out. It thrives when we lean in. So as you reflect on everything we've covered today, I encourage you to ask yourself, what kind of leadership do you believe America needs right now? What kind of future do you want to help build? Stay curious, stay informed, and most importantly, stay engaged. If this conversation sparks something in you, a thought, a question, even a disagreement, I would love to hear it. Comment below. Do you think Trump can recover? Or is this the beginning of a new political era? Share your thoughts. Let's keep this conversation going. And if you want more in-depth, thoughtful analysis like this, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Thanks for spending a few minutes with me today. I'll see you in the next video.